I'm Barbara Radke, and I'm here with Rafael Luciani, and I'm delighted that you're here, Rafael, and I'm very eager to learn about the Synod because you've had the experience of being there and living through the process, and I think that can be very exciting information for us. So I'd like to start maybe by just asking you to describe maybe the conversion the Synod and the Synod process seem to be calling us, both individually and as a church and speaking to the world. And I know also that the indigenous peoples of the Amazonian area had very important things to say. And so maybe you could help us understand what they wanted us to hear.
Yes, thank you, Barbara, for inviting me, and I'm really happy and grateful for this because it's an opportunity to explain what happens in the Synod and what comes after at the Synod. The word conversion is used often by Francis, and it has to do also with reform. Reform and conversion, they go together in Francis's teachings. So when he speaks about conversion in this context of the Synod, he's not referring to an individual conversion, but to a broader sense of conversion. It's a conversion of the person in the way we live in our daily life in relationships to others. So how do we treat the other? How does the other affect my life and I learn from the others? In this context, Francis speaks of different types of conversion. One of them is the pastoral conversion, and pastoral conversion is how do we live our life as a church and our ministries from below, from the communities, in horizontal relationships with the people, and being ourselves people of God. And this pastoral conversion involves also the change of the structures, because if my community, if my parish, or if the church in general is a clerical structure, then the relationships will not flow easily in a horizontal and in a way that we can become friends. So pastoral conversion is a concept to help us engage with the others as brothers and sisters, and from there start building up communities. Then he understands also that conversion should be a synodal conversion, because synodality is the way in which we walk together listening to each other, but this implies that bishops, clergy, religious women and men and laity, they are all faithful. That means they are all equal as baptized. And walking together is not walking being led by someone. It's walking as a community, as a whole, learning together, listening together, making proposals together. So synodal conversion is a way of being church. It's a way of living relationships in the church. And it's a way of creating structures that permits lay people, religious women and men, clergy and bishops to work together and to understand that the mission of the church is a responsibility of all, not only of the bishop. Then Francis in the Synod introduces a new conversion, which is the ecological conversion. And we have seen in the process before the Synod, especially in the document that was used for the Synod, the Instrumentum Laboris, how the people of the Amazon said that the mistreat of ecological reality today is a sin. So the document talks, in the final document of the Synod, about the ecological sin. This is a new concept because it involves our conversion. So ecology is not a problem of ambientalists only. It's a theological problem. As we destroy nature, as we end up the resources of the earth, we are also destroying the cultures that live in those places. So Francis called that we need a ecological conversion in that sense. So you have the pastoral conversion, synodal conversion, and ecological conversion, and the three to work and be really effective in the way in which we live our daily life is through a ministerial conversion. How the church creates new services that represent these three conversions in our daily life.
Was there anything special that you wanted to add that you heard that came from the indigenous peoples that they would have underlined or wanted us to hear?
Yes, a big concern throughout the listening of the indigenous peoples was to preserve their cultures. As we know, there is a lot of exploitation in the Amazon region through mining and other types of ways in which the nature is being exploited, but that is something that is affecting the cultures of these people, because big corporations, when they come, they push the indigenous communities out of where they live. So one of the main concerns was how to preserve their cultures, their belief, their costumes, because that's the way they have lived for years and years and years, and these are the inhabitants of these regions. We have seen this in Francis throughout his magisterium. He's always speaking about people's cultures, and when he visits a country, he always tries to learn from the values of the culture of that country. In this case, the Amazonian region represents many cultures, not only one monolithic culture. So when we talk about indigenous people, is all the communities and the different cultures that live in that region. So what they're asking is, how do we preserve the way in which we live, believe, and express ourselves? And the other part is, how does the church respond to that without destroying the culture? Because that's the temptation, that we think that by sending missionaries from another country and another culture, we're solving the pastoral needs. But maybe those missionaries are bringing their own cultures, and they're also destroying the cultures of the local people. So the final document of the synodal process, and also the new exhortation, speaks of decolonizing the way in which we evangelize. And therefore, I think that's another important request of the communities. How do we be there with them without destroying their own ways of expressing their values, their cultures?
So one of the things that I think I'm getting from what you're saying then is that enculturation of the gospel is very tied to this conversion experience. Would you like to speak to that, or
yes?
Do I have that right?
Yes, perfect. In fact, in the first years of Francis' pontificate, Antonio Spadaro did an interview, and Francis in that interview says that one of the key experiences that he had came from Pedro Arrupe, the superior general of the Jesuits, that gave a shift to the whole Society of Jesus, because he coined in Spanish the word enculturation. Francis says in that interview that enculturation means to go to a culture, being affected by that culture and being shocked by that culture, and start a new process of conversion in that person that goes to a new culture, until that person starts to assume the ways in which the people there express their own values. So it's a process of going from below towards building a community with the same people. So in the Synod, that's a key element of discernment, and that is connected with the role of the local churches. If a local church doesn't have the face of that culture, then the local church is not fulfilling the mission and the evangelization task of the church.
Rafael, I'd like to pick up on the word process. You're using it so much, and that is what really ignited my interest in a new way when I heard you speak about the Synod earlier this year. And I wonder if you might say a little bit about the whole process of the synodal process and how this was unique, and maybe connect that with the conversations that on comments about the Holy Spirit working through the process.
Yeah, that is a key word in Francis's way of discerning the presence of the church in the world. And in Evangelii Gaudium, he says that time is more important and bigger than space. And in Amoris Laetitia, he says that a local church that does not enculturate is a local church that wants to impose a general rule, a general law. And the most important there, he says, is not to impose a general law or to create it, but to discern in each situation, each culture in its way and in its proper way of being. So a process involves that. How do we start something that leads to a discernment that helps us to understand how the church in each context, not in a general way, in each context should express, should be, should create ministries. Process also for Francis express a way, and this is new in a magisterium, on how everything is interconnected. Something that he may have said in his first years of his pontificate has to do with something that is now being said. So this whole process is like a chain where you have different steps throughout that chain, but at the same time each step leads to a new process. So it's not a unilateral process. We can speak about processes throughout a discernment. In the Synod, that is very well reflected in the whole process, where you have the consultation to the communities. Over 80,000 consultations were made before the Synod. And then that's what we can call the pre-synodal process, and that is linked to the synodal process that was converted into an instrumentum laboris, a text that was discussed during the Synod, and thus generated a process inside the synodal aula. That means between the debates that were held during the month of October. And then that led to a final document that started a new process that helped Francis to write the exhortation. That's the post-synodal process. But the interesting is that since it is a process, it didn't end with the exhortation. The exhortation links the pre-synodal, the synodal, and the post-synodal with a new process that is open now, and it's starting now.
So what do you think we might expect next?
Well, the exhortations in the first 4 numbers give the key. It says that we all, and we means the bishops, the clergy, religious women and men and laity, that's what it says in the first 4 numbers. As people of God, it says we should reread the entire final document. We should assume the entire final document, and then it says a word that is new in a magisterium. We should apply the entire final document. And then he said, I'm not going to be quoting it because of that, because you have to read it, you have to assume it, and you have to apply it. So it leaves open and connected the exhortation which was done during the synodal process before the exhortation. So what comes next is a challenge for all of us. One thing is the creation of a structure that will be done in South America, as the exhortation says. This new structure will have the task to create new ministries and ways of implementing the ecological conversion. It's a process that will begin through CELAM, the Latin American Bishops' Council, and it will take, we don't know how many months to do that, because it's also a process of discernment that now the Latin American Church has to start. Another way of knowing what's coming next is something he said just after the synod ended. There was the group of women that were in the synod, and they requested that what was asked and approved by the Synod Fathers of opening women to diaconate, and he responded, I take the glove, in Spanish is the glove, the guante, and I will reopen a commission to study women's diaconate. We are waiting now to this to happen. There was a commission before, and the scope of that first commission was not to study the possibility of doing it, was only to study the historical roots of women's diaconate in the church. Now this new commission is to study how can we create a ministry for women through a new way of understanding diaconate. So this is another thing that is coming. Another thing that is coming are new ministries, but institutionalized ministries for the Pan-Amazonian region. We heard in the Synod sisters that said that they were already leading communities, hearing the people, and accompanying them process, because they have 1 or 2 years without a presbyter, a priest going there. So the next step is, how do we institutionalize those ministries? They cannot be led, like a personal things done by individuals. How does the local churches there recognize that as a ministry and give them the status of a ministry? That's another thing that may come next. So we have many, many things that are open. Nothing is closed. Everything is now open. We are at the beginning of the beginning, not at the end of anything.
Thanks. You really have segued us to something that is to the topics that really are the focus of the course that I'm teaching, which is on the sacraments. And we will be in the process of discussing the sacrament of holy orders, and we do that in the context of the mission of the church and ministry. And we are interested in the conversation during the synod that was around not only the inclusion of women perhaps in the diaconate, which you've addressed somewhat, but also the possibility of some clergy being married. And I wonder if you might just help us understand how those specific issues kind of connected with the synod, and what the people were trying to express was maybe a need in the region or a reality in the region that needed to be addressed.
Yes, the 2/3 of the Synodal Fathers voted in the final document to request, because they do not approve, a synod does not approve anything, it's a consultation process, but they requested the Pope to consider the figure of viri probati. That means experienced men in a community that after being deacons, they can be ordained as married men. So this figure is not new. We had this in the pontificate of Benedict XVI, when Anglicans were accepted in the church, and they were married and they were incorporated as priests. So the other thing is that the canon law establishes the ways to proceed to have that ministry in the church in that way, in that form. So it's not something that needs the direct approval of the Pope, because it's already established in the canon law and it has already been a practice of the church. What the Synod Fathers are requesting with the Vitae Probati is to provide a solution to a pastoral need in the Amazonian region. There are communities with over 1 year and even 2 years without celebrating the Eucharist. So that is a pastoral need, because the church in the documents of the council says very clearly that a community lives around the Eucharist. So how can we understand in these regions that for over 1 year or more these communities do not have Eucharist as a center of their life? No? So the Synod Fathers requested to consider the approval of this figure in an official way or in a general way for all dioceses in the Amazonian region. That, in the other hand, is a figure that will maintain the clericalist mentality in the church, because we are only substituting a priest that is not married with a priest that is married, but we are sustaining the system and the comprehension of a community only around a priest. The exhortation gives a key that can be exploited more and deepened, because it's something also new. It speaks about a new way of a pastoral understanding in which laity become the central key of a community. And that means that we are in the initial phase of that way of understanding evangelization, because we are used to have a community where the priest is, the pastor is the center of everything. So this changes everything, but it's a new phase. We still are in the building of this new ecclesiology. An element that may help us to understand this is the Conference of Medellin in 1968 and the Conference of Aparecida in 2007, which are sources on for Francis' magisterium. For example, in Evangelii Gaudium, he uses this conference as input to build his ecclesiology of a missionary discipleship church. In those conferences, the Latin American bishops called to move from a pastoral of sacramentalization towards a pastoral of evangelization. That means a church that only worries to provide specific sacraments, to a church that institutionalizes and creates new ministries to be disciples and missionaries in each reality, in each culture, throughout each local church. That is a new ecclesiology. That is an ecclesiology that is emerging. The Synod gives new insights towards that new ecclesiology, but we are not yet in a phase where we have everything clear. So the positive thing is that it is open now, a new process in which we are called to build that new ecclesiology.
Thank you so very much, especially for that new vision of where of the church in that new ecclesiology. I wonder if there's anything that I didn't ask that you might like to add, because you think it might be good for our students to know.
Yes, I think that it's important to understand in which situation, which phase are we now in regards to the reception of the Second Vatican Council, because that frames what Francis is doing, moving forward to pushing. We are in a transition, a church in transition. a church in which we find different ecclesiologies, and in this synod we saw the conflict of these ecclesiologies coexisting together right now. What I mean when I talk about a transition is that we have recovered the ecclesiology center of the people of God. And that means that all the faithful, bishops, lay, clergy, women, religious, and men, all have the same dignity and the same responsibility. We were used to a clerical ecclesial culture where hierarchy was understood in a vertical way. In this new phase, Francis has said repeatedly that hierarchy is about services in a horizontal way. It's a difference of services, but it's not a difference of status. So the exhortation calls for this shift from a clerical ecclesial culture to a ecclesial cultures distinctively lay, says the exhortation. So we are in this transition because many of the mentalities that we have in bishops and priests are not centered around the ministerial way of serving society. At the same time, many lay people are used to this clerical culture too. So they think that when they serve in a church, they have more status than other people in the society that do not have a specific ministry. The shift that we have to push and move forward is that the church engaging in society has to create ministries that go beyond the parish. For example, not only a ministry can be or should be for those who read in a Eucharist celebration. A ministry can also be those who are involved in social justice and in politics. A ministry, I mean an institutionalized ministry, not a voluntary, something that I do as a voluntary. That shift is important because when we start to institutionalize services in the society as members of the church, that changes the face of the church. That is not a church that is providing a private religion. That is a church that will serve the community beyond the parish, a church of Gaudium et Spes, a church of the people of God, of Lumen Gentium, a church in which we all have the same dignity and the same responsibility to fulfill the mission of the church.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.